This is a perspective and analysis of Frank Grimes, a character from The Simpsons. All the clips from the show are sanctioned under the Fair Use Policy, for the purpose of commentary and education. Frank Grimes and The Simpsons are owned by Matt Groening and Fox Studios. Please, for the love of God, don't sue us.
I was thinking about high school the other day, which is something I do once every 2 years or so, and I thought back to an English assignment I had in grade 12, or 11? I can't really remember, but I think it was 12. Anyway, we were studying Oedipus Rex and learning about the characteristics that define a tragic hero. My teacher gave the class the assignment of finding an example of a character who fit the tragic hero archetype in a movie, television show, book, or some other form of media. I pitched her the idea of talking about a character who appeared on a single episode of The Simpsons that I felt hit all the notes of a tragic hero archetype. She told me to go for it if I thought I could pull it off. Thus, I got to writing about how Frank Grimes from the episode Homer's Enemy is the perfect example of a tragic hero. My teacher loved the assignment I wrote, so I figured why not repurpose it into a YouTube video for my audience now to experience. See? Who says you don't learn anything in high school? A broken clock is still right twice a day. To be clear, everything I'm writing in this video is fresh off my head. If you can't tell, I'm not exactly nostalgic for high school, so I haven't kept most of my assignments intact from around that time. Instead, this video is going to be me exploring the same thesis that I chose to write about in high school, but from the perspective of my 28-year-old mind. Perhaps if you're in high school or know someone who's studying tragic heroes, this video can serve as a good frame of reference for your assignment. Don't plagiarize me though, because I'm already trying to plagiarize my own assignment that I wrote back then. If your teacher finds this video, imagine how stupid you'd look. Don't do it, you dingus. First off, let's define what creates a tragic hero. The term was first coined by philosopher Aristotle after he studied many Greek tragedies around that time. Basically, a tragic hero is a character, usually a protagonist, that manages to elicit a lot of sympathy from the audience, despite having serious flaws and taking actions which snowball into their own downfall. A tragic hero is not a perfect character, far from it as a matter of fact. They're usually wrestling with the good and bad within them. While they often start their journey on the side of good, circumstances that follow eventually shift their moral compass more towards the side of bad. Aristotle also gives more specific examples of traits which tragic heroes have beyond their arc. He states that most tragic heroes demonstrate a great deal of hubris, aka excessive pride for themselves. They often have a nemesis who opposes everything which they stand for. They may be heroic in some sense, but they have one, if not several, personality traits that hold them back. These traits often lead them to making brash decisions that blow up in their face and cause them to suffer more and more. However, despite a tragic hero's flaws becoming their own undoing, they still manage to provoke pity from the audience due to the hero's final punishment being unjust or going too far. The definition of what constitutes a tragic hero has shifted over the years to include a broader spectrum of characters, but thankfully, I believe Frank Grimes encompasses most of Aristotle's traits in one form or another. As I talk about Homer's Enemy, I'll examine how and why I feel this way. Frank Grimes' backstory is one filled with misery. He was abandoned by his family at the age of 4, resulting in him working as a delivery boy in order to keep himself afloat, never attending school. He was badly injured in a silo explosion when he was 18, leading him to spend years in the hospital recovering. During and after recovering from the accident, Frank Grimes worked long and tirelessly, studying science by mail in his free time. This eventually led to Frank Grimes achieving a master's degree in physics. Already from that description, you can tell that Frank Grimes has experienced a great deal of tragedy in his life. We talked earlier about how a tragic hero's journey usually features a reversal in luck, going from good to bad. Frank Grimes' life up until this point has been filled with nothing but bad luck. Nonetheless, Grimes pushed through the hard times and eventually overcame everything that was thrown at him, which can definitely be seen as a heroic trait. Even Mr. Burns is so touched by the sad story that he hires Grimes to work at the nuclear power plant. Granted, he completely forgets who Grimes is by the time he's recruited, but the thought was still there, briefly. Upon Grimes' hiring, the audience is finally introduced to the man behind the story. We can see that Frank is a very neat, professional, and organized man who dislikes any sort of disruption. He takes his work and life very seriously and is not jovial in any way, shape, or form, which is more than understandable given his background. While at the nuclear power plant, Frank Grimes comes in contact with Homer Simpson, who is a much different man from Grimes in every way. Whereas Grimes has worked hard and overcome adversity every day of his life, Homer has been able to coast through his life easily and become handsomely rewarded for it. In fact, whenever Homer makes a stupid mistake, the repercussions of it usually fall upon Grimes. This leads to Grimes declaring Homer as his enemy. How does this fall into the criteria of a tragic hero? Well, it really plays into Grimes' hubris. He is far from a happy man, but he does acknowledge how much he's had to work in order to get to where he is in his life. He has become bitter and jaded, but so far, he's stuck to following his morals and ethics. Grimes believes that he deserves so much more, and many of the people around him deserve so much less. The thing is, his perspective is not only understandable, but it's actually kind of correct. Whether you love or hate Grimey as a person, it's easy to sympathize with his point of view and understand who he is. We do live in a world where hardworking, honest, and intelligent people never catch a break, and lazy, ignorant, and underqualified people can get further than they really should based on sheer luck of the draw. Isn't that right, Elon Musk? Homer Simpson is the personification of everything that Grimes hates. Lenny and Carl brush off Homer's behavior as unimportant due to being so used to it and seeing Homer as a good person ultimately. Funny thing is, this is probably accurate to somebody's first experience while watching The Simpsons. Many episodes of the show do demonstrate Homer's sweeter side and give us sympathy for him, but it would be very easy to dislike Homer without the proper context of those moments. Even so, I doubt anyone would want Homer to be their co-worker, so seeing Grimes as one of the more realistic characters in the show's history gives us a much-needed reality check about how Homer can infuriate those around him. It should be noted that Homer didn't change Frank Grimes' view of the world or the people in it, he only reinforced it. Grimes' backstory states that he spent his childhood delivering toys to much more fortunate children than him. This is where Grimes' view of the unfairness in the world likely stemmed from initially. Homer Simpson was the final straw that broke Frank Grimes in more ways than one. Whenever Grimes blows up at Homer later in the episode, it really shows us how much these emotions have bubbled up inside of him. Some Simpsons fans criticize Homer's enemy for being the start of a shift in Homer's character. Many people point to this episode as being the one where Homer changed from being a dumb but lovable father into being a flat-out jerk. I don't really agree with this assessment. Homer is presented as really oblivious and obnoxious in the first half of the episode, but once Frank Grimes calls him out on his behavior, Homer does make an effort to amend things with Grimes on several occasions. He invites Grimes over to his house for dinner and attempts to be more professional while at work. Instead of acknowledging Homer's efforts and believing that he can change, Grimes becomes even more resentful due to seeing Homer's efforts as futile. Perhaps if Grimes believed that Homer could change, and was actually a good person beneath his negligence and unprofessional nature, things would have worked out much differently for him. This is where I feel Frank Grimes' fatal flaw lies. The problem to me is not his perspective of the world. True, he is very cynical and sees society as unfair, unjust, and unintelligent, but is he completely wrong in that assessment? The problem lies more within how he reacts to his perspective. Frank Grimes started out as a very straightforward, by-the-books worker who believed that hard work and awareness would get him further ahead in life. When this didn't happen, and he saw Homer getting rewarded, Grimes' goal shifted to exposing Homer for the lazy and incompetent buffoon that he admittedly is. If someone approaches life from the perspective that it's chaotic and unfair, in my opinion, this attitude could still be constructive if the person takes actions to lead the world in a better direction. I don't get the sense that Grimes wants to expose Homer for any other reason than to seek validation for the people around him to see his point of view. Grimes comes up with a plot to have Homer enter a contest for children and oust him as an unintelligent fraud. He puts a lot of time and effort into this plan, and he successfully tricked Homer, but Homer still wins the contest anyway. Seeing Homer once again getting finally rewarded for something that he should have been mocked for, Frank Grimes finally has a mental breakdown. He runs around the power plant screaming about how everyone there is crazy, and mimics Homer while he's doing so. Being totally blinded by his now broken mind, Grimes touches an extremely high voltage power cable, causing him to be electrocuted to death. What's worse is that at Grimes' funeral, Homer sleepily asks Marge to change the channel, causing the funeral attendants to laugh as Grimes is being lowered into the ground. Frank Grimes' life ended in tragedy and misery. He failed at convincing anyone around him of his perspective, despite having some very legitimate grievances. His downfall was ultimately his own undoing, as he plotted against Homer and refused to acknowledge any of the positive personality traits that Homer has. Frank Grimes could have continued on his path and learned how to navigate through the world a little bit better, proving that hard work and dedication really can get you further in life. It's true that Homer was definitely getting far in life, despite his actions deserving punishment, and Frank Grimes, despite his effort, was getting repeatedly punished, which resulted in his ultimate downfall. Some people have labeled Frank Grimes as a villain, but I don't think that's accurate in the slightest. Is he an antagonist? Sure, but that's much different. I stated earlier about how I don't think Homer is a bad person, and I don't think Grimey is a bad person either. They are two characters from completely conflicting backgrounds that clashed due to how different they are as people. I highly doubt anyone believes that Frank Grimes deserved to die for his actions. I view Frank as a tragic hero because he really did start out with noble intentions. He was an underdog who worked his way up in the world and never gave up, despite the intense adversity that he faced. Being hired at the nuclear power plant should have been the reverse in fortune that Grimes deserved, but it turned out to be the worst thing that ever happened to him, which is saying a lot. His extreme hatred towards Homer turned Grimes from a straight-edge worker into using underhanded tactics. His focus shifted from proving himself through his hard work to undermining Homer for his idiocy. Instead of building himself up, Grimes opted to tear another man down, resulting in him inadvertently tearing himself down by accident. If Grimes was a true villain, we'd take pure joy in his demise. While, yeah, I do find Grimes' death scene to be very funny, it's a very uncomfortable kind of funny. It makes me feel bad for laughing at it, but in a good way. It really hammers in the point of the episode, and it's a perfect note to encapsulate the entirety of Frank Grimes' tragic life, as well as this incredible segment of television. To the people who felt this episode went too far for them or was in poor taste, I can sympathize with that perspective. It's a dark episode that makes me feel uneasy in a lot of ways, but it still stands as my favorite Simpsons episode for a few reasons. Homer's enemy is able to give us a deep, complete picture of a character's life in a 22-minute episode of television. The humor and social commentary are spot on, and I really love how this episode makes me think about how certain people get punished over and over again, in light of those who face no repercussions for their poor actions. Yeah, it's harsh, mean, and extremely cynical, but that's how and why it makes its point so well. We need a harsh reality check once in a while, and The Simpsons unsurprisingly manages to deliver it in both a funny and honest way. On top of that, Frank Grimes in my opinion is Hank Azaria's best single performance on this show, and that's saying a lot. I'm really happy they didn't sign off the character to some random celebrity, as I doubt anyone would have done as good of a job as Azaria. The only issue I have with this episode is that Bart's subplot is kind of basic, but that doesn't detract from the impact that the main plot left on me. I find it amazing how the writers behind this episode managed to construct a funny, depressing, and layered tragic hero with a newly developed character all over the span of a half hour. Given the commercial breaks and B-plot of the episode, it's probably actually closer to 15 minutes. Homer's Enemy is one of the most impressive episodes of any show I've ever seen, and it birthed an unforgettable character who helped me pass grade 12 English. For that, Aristotle and I salute you, Grimy.
Special thanks to our Patreon supporters, including Hilly and Brand, for supporting this channel financially. If you'd like to donate as well, follow the links in the video description to donate to our channel on Patreon or PayPal. Also join our Discord to talk to us and a few of our subscribers in the community and all that. If you're so inclined, be sure to like, comment, and hit that like button. Hit the like button. Seriously, hit the like button. And yeah, share the videos. Patreon supporters will be in the list right in front of me.